Tonight, it's V-Day. A World War II survivor and the PM line up to be the first in Australia to get the shot. Precious cargo arrives in Darwin. Vaccinations here will go first to hundreds of NT frontline workers.
Today is a very significant and exciting day. We are here at Darwin Airport and the Pfizer vaccine has just landed.
The Catherine River peaks but doesn't burst its banks. Locals now celebrate the big wet.
It's like it's brought the town back to life because we've had so many poor wet seasons in a row and I haven't felt the town this happy in...
And a walk in the park for the Queen of Melbourne Park. Naomi Osaka claims her second Australian Open. Hello and welcome to ABC News Sunday. I'm Laetitia Lemke. The nation's COVID-19 vaccine rollout has officially kicked off. An 84-year-old World War II survivor making history, becoming the first Australian to receive the jab. She was joined by a select group of Australians, including the Prime Minister, who hailed today a game changer in the fight against COVID-19. Political reporter Jane Norman begins our coverage.
A witness to history.
So you ready to go, Jane?
Yeah, I'm ready. Jane Malishak has survived a world war, fleeing Poland and then Germany.
You've got lots of experience.
I do. Now, in the midst of a once-in-a-century pandemic,
Here we go.
she's become the first Australian to be inoculated against COVID-19.
The vaccine.
The big moment, mostly going to plan.
Very good.
13 months after the first case was confirmed here,
The Chief Medical Officer of Australia is now vaccinated.
the race to vaccinate the nation has officially begun.
Mr Prime Minister.
The Prime Minister demonstrating his confidence
This is curtain raiser. That's how I describe it.
before all Australians are asked to roll up their sleeves from tomorrow.
All done.
Under the first phase, 50,000 doses of the Pfizer vaccine have been sent to the States to inoculate quarantine, border and healthcare workers at specialist hubs at selected public hospitals. Another 30,000 vaccines will be administered by specialist teams being sent into hundreds of aged care and disability care homes across the country.
I'm here in solidarity. I'm not asking for anyone to do something that I'm not prepared to do myself.
Confidence is the key to the campaign to convince as many Australians as possible to get vaccinated, although some need no encouragement.
A lot of our staff have been living like hermits, too frightened to go out.
This is, I think today is the third time in around about a year that I've been out, and it's lovely.
The Prime Minister has nominated the vaccine rollout as his #1 priority this year. In 8 months, it's hoped the entire population will be inoculated against COVID-19. It's a massive and complex logistical exercise, and there's a lot riding on it. Scott Morrison's political fortunes and the chance to return to life as we knew it.
Every day that goes past from here gets more normal. Every day.
A turning point in the battle against COVID-19. Jane Norman, ABC News, Canberra.
Australia's rollout will happen in 5 phases with the hope of having everyone vaccinated by October. Once you know which phase you're in, what happens next? Medical reporter Sophie Scott explains.
The first phase of the COVID vaccine rollout starts tomorrow, with quarantine, border and frontline healthcare workers amongst the first in line. So how do Phase 1 people get the jab? Eligible workers will get an email from the State Health Department, their details supplied by their employer. They can schedule an appointment at one of 16 public hospital hubs. Those who live or work in aged care and disability homes will be contacted by the facility. Those jabs will mostly be done on site. And who gets which vaccine? Aged care residents will go first. They'll get the Pfizer vaccine. So will health and quarantine workers. Aged care staff will follow in the coming weeks with AstraZeneca. They'll all be given a consent form to sign and the option to see a doctor if they need advice. Once injected, the side effects are mostly mild.
You may get some soreness in the arm and some tenderness over the next day or so, and you may feel a little bit off colour, have a headache and some chills. This is, 30–50% of people, but it goes away. It's an indication the vaccine is actually working.
People will be monitored for up to half an hour after the jab to check they don't have an allergic reaction.
It's rare. It seems to occur in people who have a predisposition to severe allergies.
Authorities will also follow up with a text to ask about potential side effects. How do you get your second dose? You'll be sent a reminder after 3 weeks for Pfizer, 12 for AstraZeneca.
There's science behind having the second dose to kind of boost your immune response. So it is really important that people get their second dose.
And at the end, people will get a confirmation certificate and they're logged on the Australian Immunisation Register. But in the later phases, this process will change. You'll have to contact a doctor or pharmacist. And if you're young and healthy, you'll be in the final group. Some people won't get the vaccine for now, including children, pregnant women and some vulnerable and frail people. Professor Cunningham says it's because the vaccines haven't been tested in these groups.
I would expect those people to be immunised eventually, particularly when the trials come in.
The government hopes everyone who's eligible will be offered a vaccine by October.
I think it is feasible.
But vaccines alone won't end the pandemic. Remember, the vaccine is voluntary and free. Just be patient. Sophie Scott, ABC News.
Territorians on the front line will be the first to be vaccinated against COVID-19. The first 1,000 jabs arrived in the top end today and will be rolled out from tomorrow.
Touchdown with precious cargo. The much anticipated COVID-19 vaccine arrives in Darwin. 700 Territorians will get their first vaccination this week.
The first people to receive the vaccine this week will be our frontline workers from the Centre for National Resilience and our most at-risk Royal Darwin Hospital medical staff, such as those working at the COVID Centre. This will begin from tomorrow.
The vaccines will also be delivered to Alice Springs tomorrow, and frontline workers there will be vaccinated on Wednesday. It requires 2 doses at least 21 days apart. The government wants to make sure people return for their final jab.
So we'll be working hard to make sure our recall systems are contacting people who've had their first dose, and we'll be working with individual healthcare providers to make sure that happens.
It's hoped all Territorians receive their first vaccination by mid-year.
Residents and staff here in this Darwin nursing home will be amongst the first in the NT to receive their jab next week, but they will have to wait until the next batch to arrive in the top end.
The government is working with Aboriginal Medical Services to help coordinate the delivery of vaccinations to remote communities. Peter Lacey, ABC News.
Katherine residents were once again on alert today as the river rose another metre overnight. It peaked at almost 16 metres, and so far it appears the town has escaped any major flooding. But it did send many locals to the town's bridge for a closer waterfront view. Suwaiba Hanifi reports from Katherine.
There hasn't been flooding like this in Katherine for years.
Where we live, our backyard is the Katherine River and we can't see the river, but at the moment it's only a couple of metres away and we look out and we've got a river view.
Boats are being used to ferry people to the popular gorge.
There's a community that lives on the other side of this creek, and also all the staff and that live at the gorge, and also you have people that live in town and they work here. Takes a bit to get everyone over the river every morning.
At Katherine Hot Springs, this normally popular weekend spot is no place for picnickers.
It's a lot different. The water is very high at the moment, so we used to walk down here and swim in hot springs when it was a lot lower, and yeah, obviously you can't get down there at the moment.
The Katherine River climbed to almost 16 metres today. A further 2 metres would have caused major flooding in the town. But the town council says the deluge of water will come at a cost.
If there is damage, we would have to assess it and see, where the money will be coming from. It might be insurance, and it might be that we have to pay for it ourselves.
At this stage, there have been no reports of injuries or evacuations, and residents are glad they won't have to start sandbagging their homes.
I think we came close. I think the graph that was sent to us from the local disaster coordinator showed that we were close to calling some sort of stand-up this weekend, but the rain eased off a bit.
Katherine is having one of its best wet seasons in years, and that's given locals something to celebrate. The town's river bridge has become a main attraction, with families arriving to watch the fast-flowing water rush beneath them.
It's very exciting. We live out on Gorge Road, so we've just come into town to have a look. Hopefully we don't get cut off.
It's like it's brought the town back to life, because we've had so many poor wet seasons in a row, and I haven't felt the town this happy in, like I said, years.
Although the water's edge is not a safe place to be.
Lots of people are talking too about croc sightings up near the walkways and things, because it's pushed the crocs up, and the wallabies are all running around, so they can't sit down near the river anymore.
118 millimetres of rain has fallen across the region since Thursday, but further flooding is unlikely, with conditions easing during the week as a tropical low moves west towards the Timor Sea. For tour operators, the wet conditions are showcasing the river at its best. This powerboat hasn't operated for years because of low river levels.
Most people are in the wet season are stuck in areas and they can't leave their own homes, flooded towns, communities and stuff like that. Lucky enough, we still have access to Katherine and we get to some exciting work.
A town which knows firsthand the perils of flooding, but can now enjoy a change in the weather. Saweba Hanifi, ABC News, Katherine.
The Chief Minister has fronted the media for the first time since a scandal engulfed his government. Michael Gunner had come to talk vaccines, but the subject soon turned to the member for Blaine and his dumping from caucus. Mark Turner was expelled from the Labor team last week after admitting to an extramarital relationship, something that had been denied up until then. The Chief Minister has defended his handling of the matter.
Without doubt, if people had been more forthcoming with us, we would have acted earlier and publicly, but we did what we could with the information that we had.
Michael Gunner also says he's not aware of any drug use within the party, nor a police investigation. The former Liberal staffer who alleges she was raped inside Parliament House has revealed she'll make a formal complaint to police on Wednesday. Brittany Higgins claims she was sexually assaulted by a senior male colleague in a minister's office after a night out in March 2019. She says she's waited a long time for justice and wants her alleged attacker to feel the full force of the law. The Prime Minister has responded to the allegations by launching a series of reviews into the culture at Parliament House.
It's a fairly straightforward expectation. I want the culture to be better. I want the system to be better.
Parliament House must be a place where women feel safe to work. No ifs, no buts. That's what must change.
Ms Higgins is expected to make a statement to the AFP on Wednesday. The same day, her former boss, Defence Minister Linda Reynolds, is due to address the press club. Still to come on ABC News Sunday, a decade after the Fukushima disaster in Japan, and the cleanup is taking longer than expected.
I'm Jake Sturmer in Fukushima, 10 years after the earthquake, tsunami and nuclear meltdown that changed this region and Japan forever. I'll take you inside the destroyed plant. The cleanup could take another 40 years and COVID is making it much harder.
A flight in the United States has been forced to make an emergency landing after its engine caught fire. Passengers on the United Airlines flight filmed the terrifying moment the engine failed soon after taking off from Denver Airport. Large parts of the plane fell to the ground over suburbs of a nearby town.
Shortly after takeoff en route to Hawaii, the unthinkable happened. Images show smoke trailing behind the plane as the flames consumed the right engine. Shocked onlookers on the ground say they heard an explosion.
Hear it?
Yeah.
It's just a plane.
231 passengers and 10 crew were on board, and many were terrified.
You heard this boom, and obviously something wasn't right because the plane was vibrating hard, just constant, severe vibration.
And my youngest is a 10-year-old, and he was scared. And you hear that, he was terrified in his voice, and What's happening? What's going to happen next? What's going on?
In a recording from air traffic control, the pilot can be heard making the Mayday call.
Mayday aircraft just experienced a engine failure, need a turn immediately.
Debris from the plane rained down on the suburb of Broomfield, just outside Denver. Resident Kirby Clements was inside when he heard a huge booming sound. This piece landed in his front yard, only just missing his house.
But as soon as I opened the door, I go, oh, that's the front engine of a plane.
Police urged local residents to stay away from the fallen debris.
Because the debris was so far and wide, please don't touch it, please don't move it.
The Boeing 777 landed safely, with no one on board even injured.
Yay!
Laura Yumshajakian, ABC News.
Floodwaters have reached up to 2 metres high in Jakarta after torrential rain triggered severe flooding in areas of the densely populated city. Drone footage shows the extent of the monsoon floods across the Indonesian capital. Cars and motorbikes are submerged and roads inundated with a deluge of water. A rescue operation has helped stranded residents to safety. The flooding has forced more than 1,000 people to leave their homes, and authorities say 24 evacuation centres have been set up across the city. Indonesia is in peak monsoon season and residents are being warned of more heavy rain and strong winds this week. Security forces in Myanmar have opened fire on protesters, killing at least 2 people and injuring more than 20 others. The deaths mark a brutal escalation in the military's response to the daily demonstrations against this month's coup. Aung San Suu Kyi's supporters are now calling for international help to pressure the coup leaders to step aside.
A tense standoff with demonstrators quickly turns deadly. Fear then sweeps through the protesters. Filmed from another angle, the forces can be clearly seen shooting live ammunition as they move forward. On another front, people fled when water cannon and tear gas were used to clear the crowd. Some casualties were treated on the ground, while others were raced away for medical treatment. They'd been hit by rubber bullets and overcome by tear gas. Earlier, the demonstrators had set up a barricade in a noisy but peaceful protest, calling on the coup leaders to step aside and allow Aung San Suu Kyi to take her rightful place as Myanmar's elected leader. It's a sentiment echoed around the country.
We young people have our dreams, but everything is gone now. Everything we hoped for is being destroyed.
The violence erupted after peaceful commemorations were held for a young female student who died after being shot in the head while protesting earlier this month. Developments on the ground are being closely monitored around the world. The European Union's foreign policy chief has called on Myanmar's security forces to stop the violence against civilians, warning sanctions could be on the way. Jenny Lavelle, ABC News.
It's almost 10 years since the devastating Fukushima earthquake, tsunami and nuclear meltdown, but the cleanup has a long way to go. Almost 16,000 people died in the magnitude 9 quake and tsunami. More than 2,500 are still classified as missing, and tens of thousands are unwilling or unable to return home. The cleanup could take another 40 years, but it's not just the radioactive fuel that's proving tricky. The plant's operator is running out of space to store more than 1 million tonnes of contaminated water. It says it may have to dump it into the ocean, to the horror of local fishermen. North Asia correspondent Jake Sturmer has secured rare access to the devastated area and brings us tonight's special report from inside the Fukushima nuclear plant.
A moment that Japan and much of the world won't forget. A magnitude 9 quake striking the country's northeastern coast in March 2011. Triggering a massive tsunami which reached as high as 40 metres.
Then an explosion at a nuclear plant spread radiation throughout the region. Aftershocks continue to this day. This week, a magnitude 7.3 quake shook the area. More than 140 people were injured, homes and buildings were damaged, and parts deep within Fukushima Daiichi's nuclear reactors may have been further weakened. The ABC has been given rare access inside the plant to witness the decommissioning efforts.
Until a few years ago, you had to wear a full protective suit throughout most of this plant, but now so much rubble has been removed from outside the reactor that levels are much lower. You can wear just plain clothes. The mask and gloves are more for COVID than dust and radiation. But that's just outside the reactors themselves. Inside, where most of the radioactive material is concentrated, the danger remains. The plant's owner, TEPCO, hasn't been able to remove any of the debris from the 3 melted down cores. There's 800 tonnes of highly radioactive nuclear fuel inside these reactors, and TEPCO has spent the last 10 years stabilising it and preparing for it to be removed. That was supposed to happen this year, but coronavirus has delayed that by up to 12 months.
We're planning to remove the fuel debris using a robot arm that's being made and tested in the UK. But because of the coronavirus situation there, that's been delayed.
But that's not the most pressing issue facing the plant's owners and the government. To find out more, I need to go even deeper inside, and that means a full protective suit.
This is where the plant's highly radioactive contaminated water ends up. Anything that's been in or around the reactor and the molten fuel comes here and is processed through these pipes and filters to remove 62 different types of radioactive materials. But it's an extraordinarily challenging and complex task.
The problem is TEPCO is running out of space to store more than 1 million tonnes of wastewater. It's had to build 1,000 tanks, but says it doesn't have room for any more.
As we carry out the decommission work, we can't just store the treated water. We will need a facility to safely store the fuel debris and the spent nuclear fuel.
A government panel of experts last year said releasing the water into the ocean was the most practical solution. That's how it's done at other plants in Japan and around the world. The water contains a radioactive element called tritium, but authorities insist it'll be in such low levels, released over such a long period of time, that it'll be safe. For those who make a living from that ocean and its reputation, the 2011 disaster destroyed their businesses overnight. These were once some of the most prized waters in the country, and Haruo Ono has fished them for more than 50 years.
Yes, they say it's okay to release tritium, but what do consumers think? We can't sell fish because the consumers say no. While people are not buying right now, would they buy something that's not 100% safe?
He lost his brother and all of his possessions in the tsunami. Then the nuclear meltdown destroyed his livelihood. Most fishermen in the area are covering their loss of income with TEPCO payouts, but they want a sustainable industry. After a decade doing all they can to convince the public their catch is safe, now they're worried it'll all be for nothing if the region's reputation is destroyed by dumping contaminated water into the ocean.
Why does Fukushima have to suffer the most? We were victims once. Why do they have to release it in Fukushima? If they released it evenly throughout Japan, it would be far less damaging to our reputation.
The fish from Fukushima is safe. Radiation tests are still carried out every week, and it's getting harder to find a fish that shows radiation. It's almost at the same level as fish from other areas, so I hope people will enjoy the local catch.
For fish shop owner Katsumasa Okawa, he's had to diversify his business with products from all around Japan and the world, though he wants to be selling more Fukushima fish. but he knows the water needs to be disposed of for the clean-up to continue.
As one Fukushima citizen, I'd like the nuclear plant to be decommissioned as quickly as possible, so I feel I have to accept some sort of damage or negative element.
Ultimately, the decision on what to do with the water will be made by the Japanese government, and it's only got until the end of next year before room runs out at the site. TEPCO has indicated it will compensate fishermen for further losses if the release of water damages their businesses, but many fear it will be the end of the industry, and that would be felt by the people of Fukushima for generations to come. Jake Sturmer, ABC News, Fukushima.
Before Fukushima was Christchurch, and tomorrow marks 10 years since New Zealand was rocked by a deadly earthquake. 185 people died and thousands of buildings toppled. It's left an indelible impact on the city and the Australian first responders who risked their lives to help.
Jesus Christ!
Christchurch in crisis. 10 years ago, New Zealand's second largest city was shaken to pieces. The magnitude 6.3 earthquake struck at lunchtime in the busy CBD. Buildings collapsed, liquefaction came from beneath. Thousands of people were injured, many were crushed in the rubble. The city's cathedral spire crumbled to the ground.
It felt like a movie set, like everything had just been dropped at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. There was half-eaten sandwiches, cups of coffee that were still half full.
The earthquake killed 185 people, including one Australian. 115 of those died in the Canterbury television building.
It was what's called a pancake collapse. It had collapsed almost directly down onto itself.
It sparked a mammoth international recovery effort. Disaster response teams from Australia were sent in, joining the desperate search for survivors.
Over the period of the first 58 hours that we're on there, we recovered 43 bodies from that location. Unfortunately, none of those were alive.
Victorian doctor Lydia Johns-Putra was in the city for a medical conference when she was thrust into the chaos. She won a bravery award for saving a man trapped in a collapsed building, amputating his legs in the dark with a pocket knife and a hacksaw.
We weren't standing up, we were crouching or on our tummies. It was rubble on the ground, whether that was glass or broken concrete, I don't know. And then there were aftershocks as well.
The series of earthquakes and aftershocks cost insurers more than $31 billion. About 100,000 homes were damaged and 1,300 commercial buildings were condemned and demolished. A decade on, Christchurch resembles a very different city.
Crises themselves do present opportunities to do things differently, to take on new ideas and then to also reimagine the future. If we can make this a better place, then we do so as a legacy to their memory.
It's life-changing, so I reflect on it very regularly. It's a part of me.
Public and private memorials will be held tomorrow. Lily Nothling, ABC News.
Australia's facing criticism for releasing a documentary of the King of Thailand as protesters in the country call for reform on the monarchy. The film showcases the King's time in Australia at a boarding school and with the Defence Force. Southeast Asia correspondent Mazoe Ford reports.
From his arrival in Sydney and time boarding at the King's School to his military training at Duntroon and with the SAS, the then Crown Prince Maha Vajiralongkorn spent 6.5 years in Australia. These images were unearthed from the National Archives, combined with interviews from his former classmates, and made into a documentary by the Australian Embassy in Bangkok.
We were very conscious that the Thai nation were placing a lot of trust in Australia for that period of time.
Australian Ambassador Alan McKinnon hosted a special screening of the 18-minute piece for the King, Queen and Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha.
After the screening, the documentary aired in 3 parts on Thai TV earlier this week.
Some have questioned the timing of that release.
It's sending a very awkward message because we are in the middle of an unprecedented call for monarchy reform, and then you see the government of Australia simply behave as if, there's no controversy.
Last year, tens of thousands of student protesters made demands for curbs on the King's power and wealth that older generations wouldn't have dared to make. Since November, police have charged more than 50 people under the Royal Defamation Law.
These people are now facing prison sentences of up to 15 years for quite small things, and there are 16 and 17-year-olds. So we would think from a human rights perspective that it's problematic that those are happening in the name of the current monarch.
Australia is supposed to be a democratic government that would stand for freedom of expression.
The ambassador declined an interview, but a statement from the government says the documentary demonstrates a unique connection between Australia and Thailand and was produced before protests escalated using an existing budget. Mazoe Ford, ABC News, Bangkok.
First-time homebuyers may have been hoping for a reprieve from surging prices over the past year, but that hasn't happened. And with prices now rising at a significant rate, there are once again concerns about affordability. Alan Kohler reports.
With housing at the moment, everything is booming. Approvals, construction, renovations, finance, and of course, prices. So everyone's a winner. Well, not quite. If you're trying to buy a house, you're not winning. The government's home builder grant of $25,000 up to December 31 and now $15,000 till the end of March has produced a massive boom in construction and renovations. There's now a pipeline of 18 months' work for the industry, at least. But to use the grant, you have to borrow the rest. And so there's a new boom in debt going on, and that's off a high base. Now, the extra houses being built might eventually weigh on prices, but there's no sign of that yet. The CBA house price model is predicting a rise of 14% in house prices across the country this year. CoreLogic tells me that prices in Sydney went up by 0.9% in the first 2 weeks of February, which is an annual rate of more than 20%. Regional prices are galloping even faster than city prices because of the new tide of working from home. And housing affordability is back on the national agenda. It's not the repayments, it's the deposit. Low interest rates mean that mortgage repayments are less than the rent on the same place. But saving a 20% deposit of the median Australian house price of $583,000 will take 10 years. And that's if you can save $1,000 a month and pay the rent. Eat as well, and you might save a deposit by the time you retire.
Naomi Osaka has been labelled the new boss of the tour following her clinical victory last night in the Australian Open final. Osaka beat a gallant Jennifer Brady 6-4, 6-3 to claim her fourth major title, cementing her rising dominance in the game.
After a serene 2 weeks where she was rarely troubled, it took a stray champagne cork to finally put Naomi Osaka on the back foot. Perhaps she needed the excitement after an underwhelming celebration last night.
I just washed my face and tried to go to sleep.
Her first set was much more exciting. When Brady handed Osaka a 3-1 lead, a landslide looked possible.
Oh dear, another double in the game. And it's a very soft break.
But the American didn't wilt under the spotlight. A run of winners saw her break back and she levelled the match at 4-all.
And look at this from Brady.
2 points then defined the match. Osaka saved a break point.
That's big.
While Brady made a big error in the same situation, gifting the advantage.
Oh no. The set has gone.
From there, Osaka powered away, opening up a 4-love lead.
Oh, come on. Come on, really?
The Japanese star calmly closed it out.
Osaka has done it again.
Oh, she's going to win a lot more. There's very little doubt about that.
Osaka is only 23, but now has 4 Grand Slam titles to her name. She's been dubbed the successor to Serena Williams' crown.
I feel like it's an honour that I'm in that conversation. Hopefully I'm able to be more stable this year and feel more worthy of potentially having that title.
All 4 titles have come on hard courts, so her next aim is to master grass and clay. But she's already showed she's a fast learner. Peter Lusted, ABC News, Melbourne.
The AFLW season is nearing the halfway mark and the battle for the top 6 is intensifying. In the last matches of round 4, Collingwood ran over an inaccurate Kangaroos outfit and Adelaide ended Brisbane's unbeaten run. A plucky Bulldogs wore down the high-flying Demons, while the Giants kept their finals hopes alive with a victory over West Coast.
Collingwood is fast firming as a genuine contender, keeping its undefeated status after thumping pre-season fancy North Melbourne.
What a goal by Chloe Malloy!
The sides having the same number of scoring shots, but the Kangaroos couldn't buy a goal. The Lions could have joined the Magpies and Fremantle at the top of the ladder with a win over Adelaide in blistering conditions in Brisbane. However, it was the visitors who got on top immediately.
Phillips at the top of the square, sockers it through.
Brisbane eventually found its run and a scoreless first quarter became a distant memory.
And the Lions get back-to-back goals.
But with a goal in it, Erin Phillips had a chance to seal the points with her 4th.
25 out. Guides it through. Crows will win.
It was a dour struggle at the Whitten Oval, Melbourne piling on the pressure early against the Western Bulldogs.
It spills to Paxman and she slots it.
But the Bulldogs stayed in it and wore down the D's with Izzy Huntington prominent.
Does she get the reward for effort? Oh, yes, she does. Again. 2 to Huntington.
Melbourne was still in the match till Ellie Blackburn's major helped grab the Dogs a spot in the top 6.
Blackburn to a vacant goal. She's a cold killer.
And in the late game, the winless West Coast was right in it in the first half.
It bounces perfectly for her teammate and Kelly, and she runs in and kicks the goal.
But GWS had to win to stay in the finals race and did just enough.
Off the ground, Cora Staunton. How about that? Quick as a flash. She's got 3. Huge goal for the Giants.
Matthew Smith, ABC News.
Now to the weather, and tonight's viewer pick of a foggy dawn at Inyaluk Hill, Goombalanya has been sent in by Bob Gosford. More wet weather across the top end today. It was hot to very hot in the south. 31 in Darwin today, 32 in Jabiru. Katherine was up to 31 degrees, Borroloola 30, Alice Springs 41 degrees, a scorcher, 38 in Tennant Creek. To rainfall and 86 millimetres was recorded over Bradshaw Range in the 24 hours to 9 a.m. 67 at Delamere Weapons Range, and more heavy falls today in the Katherine region with 96 millimetres at Bradshaw Range. Around Australia, a top of 21 in Melbourne, up to 30 in Canberra. The satellite images show widespread cloud covering northern Australia associated with an active trough. A weak low over the western top end is edging westwards into the Timor Sea. Another weak trough extends from the west coast of WA and across central Australia. Interstate tomorrow, a sunny 34 in Brisbane, up to 39 degrees in Perth and showers in Sydney. To our north, rain in Denpasar, thunderstorms in Port Moresby, sunny in Singapore. Around the Territory tomorrow, a sunny 38 degrees in Alice Springs, Tennant Creek 39. Possible thunderstorms continuing in the north, 33 in Katherine, Nhulunbuy 31. 33 degrees in Jabiru and a top of 31 degrees in Darwin. There's a flood watch for the northwest and Carpentaria coastal rivers. Catchments are saturated. Many waterways are flowing strongly. A minor flood warning continues for Katherine with some flooding at Gorge Road. A moderate flood warning continues for the Waterhouse River at Beswick Bridge. A severe thunderstorm warning has been issued for the Daly, Carpentaria and Gregory districts with heavy falls, possible flash flooding for areas including Katherine, Timber Creek, Barunga and Doris Vale. The high tide is at 3:15 tomorrow. Seas are up to 1 metre and the sun's setting about 7:15. Looking ahead, the slow-moving trough over the top end is continuing wet weather for Darwin. In Alice Springs, sunny conditions continuing with a cooler change developing on Tuesday. And to stay up to date with the latest news from the Northern Territory, head to our website news.abc.net.au and select the Northern Territory from the drop-down menu. And that's ABC News for this Sunday night. Thanks for your company. Good night.
Next on ABC TV.